Huge news today, guys. Has the U.S. court case against Ironmace been dismissed? If so, what happens now, and what does this mean for Dark and Darker? Stay tuned to find out. Yo, what up, guys? It's Derp here with another video about the Dark and Darker court case. This time, huge news. Yes, the U.S. case against Ironmace has been dismissed without prejudice. However, this doesn't mean the fight is over. There's still a little bit that has to happen here. I'm going to explain why we should celebrate, but we should also remain a little bit cautious, especially over the next few months. What I'm going to cover in this video is what happened, why the case was dismissed, can the case be appealed or reopened, what happens next, and then at the end I'm going to throw in a quick TLDR. So if you want to just jump ahead to probably the last few minutes, there's a TLDR at the end. Before we get in the video, I want to say sorry for missing the secondary documentation this morning in today's live stream. I had just woken up. I was in a little bit of a rush. There was a little bit of an emergency going on, so I didn't really have time to read the whole article before I got into it, and at first glance, it looked like something that I've already read. But thanks for watching me break the big news this morning. There was like 100 people on the stream. That's huge for me. I hope you guys had as much fun as I did, and I'm going to try to keep bringing you guys as much of this content as possible. So, thanks, guys. I would also like to give a huge shout out to everybody who's been watching live, who's been subscribing, who's been leaving comments, and joining the guild. Massive thanks to everyone shown here for the supers, the memberships, and the support. I cannot do this without you guys. I love you. You're all changing my life in ways I can't even describe. So thank you again. Thank you. I love you guys. Thank you for the support. So I'm going to try to keep this video short so I can jump back into the game, and I'm stoked and I want to play with my friends. So here we go. So what happened? The U.S.-based lawsuit in the United States against Ironmace has been dismissed on the grounds of forum nonconvenience. Basically, the judge decided that Korea was a better venue for the case, and Nexon couldn't get their arguments straight, at least enough to convince the judge to allow it to the case to move forward in the United States. That's it, right? The case was dismissed. Like, U.S. case is over until Nexon appeals, essentially. Why was the case dismissed? That's a little bit more complicated. There are a bunch of reasons, many of which I've already gone over and described. But there's a bunch of reasons why the judge decided to dismiss this case. To keep this brief, I'm just going to go over a quick list of reasons I found after digging into the secondary documentation from the judges. Here's my main takeaways. The judge, right in the opening statement in section 1, got pretty pissed about Nexon's shenanigans with the SIR replies. As I said, they might. It seems like the judge got pretty upset by the SIR reply nonsense. The employment contract Nexon is using as proof of that they actually own the rights to P3, because it was Mr. Choi's idea, as far as I know, and it's his intellectual property. But because of the contract that they had, that intellectual property becomes Nexon's, right? And that's the employment contract. Because they cite this contract as their reasoning that they own the trade secrets, that they've put themselves into a pretty sticky situation, because that same exact contract is almost exactly why this case is getting dismissed now. Furthermore, Nexon's claims that Valve should be taken into consideration, which is why they think that Washington is an appropriate venue, is completely invalid. Valve is not a party to the lawsuit at all, nor have they agreed to act as a witness. Suing Ironmace in Washington literally makes no sense, as stated by the judge in section 3, line 14. Furthermore, the jurisdiction and venue are two different things. So while the DMC applies to jurisdiction between the parties involved, it does not mean that the case has to be held in that specific court, as the judge says in section 3, line 20. Now, I'm going to leave a link to the document in the description, so if you guys want to go fact check me, feel free. Not citing their case as examples really screwed Nexon over. See section 3, paragraph 1, line 5. They didn't draw any valid similarities or connections between their sources and what was happening in this case. And a lot of times, and got kind of upset with Nexon for doing this, and then Ironmace did it a few times too. And I said, hey, you can't do this, Ironmace. This is bad form, right? You can't do that in these lawsuits. You can't just cite cases and then hope the judge will just take them at face value. They're going to read, even if your document is 200 pages, they're still going to read that document and sift through it, right? So you got to be careful. You just can't do what they did. So, and the judge called them out on it. Nexon also misconstrued the Jones Act. The Jones Act is more about where the action took place and where the residents reside. So, as I said in previous videos, where the TV was stolen from, not where it was sold. There's two different crimes here going on. Now, if they want to go for after theft of stolen property, essentially stolen trade secrets or stolen copyright, they first have to prove that that copyright was stolen from another place and then specifically sold in the United States, right? That's a completely different type of lawsuit than what we saw taking place, which might come up later. But after this dismissal, if the appeal fails, it's going to be very unlikely that the courts will even accept that lawsuit. So yeah, they misconstrued the Jones Act, and the judge was kind of upset about that. Nexon cited cases that actually proved Ironmace's point, specifically Atlantic Marine. The judge goes into this in detail in the document in Section 3. The DMCA is also actually directed at Valve, not Ironmace. So the way that DMCAs work is it's a legal notice to the party who's hosting the service or software or the IP. So in this case, Valve, saying, hey, you have to take this down because there's a lawsuit coming up, and if you don't take it down, we're going to sue you. That's what the DMCA is. So the DMCA is actually a legal notice for them to remove Dark and Darker from the market or risk being sued if their case against Ironmace goes through. It's a quasi-contract of the quasi-contract, as the judge calls it, of the DMCA is between Nexon and Valve. And then there's also a quasi-contract because Ironmace rebutted this, but that's also between Ironmace and Valve. So you have two quasi-contracts with the DMCA, one with Nexon and Valve and one with Ironmace and Valve. The one with Nexon and Valve says, hey, take this down or else we'll sue you for basically selling stolen goods. And the one between Ironmace and Valve is saying, hey, keep this up, this lawsuit is frivolous. But then Nexon followed it up by actually bringing forward a lawsuit, so Steam had to oblige or risk being sued, right? That's how the DMCA works. So should a lawsuit come from the DMCA, both parties then agree to sue Valve in Washington, but not each other. That's not how the DMCA works. I hadn't even considered this, but the judge was like, whoa. This DMCA stuff that you're referring to doesn't actually even take place here. That's between you and Valve, not you and Ironmace. So Nexon's lawyers got that completely wrong. Now, Nexon's one of the biggest and most damaging things, in my opinion, was Nexon's argument that Ironmace is not a party to the employment contract is completely invalid, especially if they want to sue Ironmace for trade secret theft and copyright violation as a entity, right? They can't both enforce the contract and not enforce it. Ironmace cannot either is liable for damages and therefore is held to the same standards as the contract, or is not liable for damages and is therefore not held to the same contract, in which case Ironmace didn't steal any trade secrets, so Nexon cannot go after Ironmace. It kind of puts them in this weird situation, and you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? Like, you just can't do that, which Nexon was trying to do. And the judge saw right through it and just said, no, get the hell out of here. And another thing that really damaged Nexon was Nexon countersuing Ironmace in Korea actually screwed them over in the United States, because the judge basically said, hey, if you truly don't believe that Suwon is a credible district and a credible venue and a credible jurisdiction, why are you actually suing Ironmace there to begin with, right? Why are you taking Mr. Choi to court there for criminal charges, and why are you suing Ironmace there for civil charges? Why are you doing this all in Suwon instead of Seoul or the U.S., right? So their argument kind of fell through the window the second that they sued Ironmace and Suwon. That was their doing, not Ironmace's. So they kind of bit themselves in the ass with that. So And because the reasoning behind this is because as soon as they signed the documentations pushing the lawsuit in Korea forward, that creates a legal contract between the courts and both parties, right? By suing each other, they're creating a legally binding contract that everybody approves of this venue for the lawsuit by actually carrying the suit forward. This means that the Suwon district is appropriate for both parties because they've already agreed to it. Otherwise, they would have chosen Seoul as their venue from the jump, or chosen the United States from the very beginning. But no, both parties agreed that Suwon is the place to go as soon as they filed the paperwork to sue each other there. So that was a huge reason for the case being dismissed. The courts also decided that they accused Nexon of something called forum shopping, which is trying to get the best financial outcome from the best forum and the most favorable district that they think they can, and that is actually heavily frowned upon. So essentially what happens is, if your lawyer thinks you don't have a good case in California, they'll be like, hey, let's try it. Let's try to go get this case somehow moved to Texas, right? Because we could either get more money or it might have an easier chance of winning, right? And that's super frowned upon. The courts hate that stuff. So I got to remind you guys that that's just a summary of a 16-page document. I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. However, I've also mentioned about 90% of this stuff in previous videos. So if you guys want to learn more about how all of that stuff works, feel free to watch the earlier videos in the series. I'm going to try to add links to those specific videos in the description at some point. I'm going to try to do it as soon as possible. I might not get to it. I can't promise anything. In short, it was dismissed because Nexon's lawyers were too aggressive. They argued too much, and they tried to sue in too many places. That's really it. So they tried to bog down the courts in arguments rather than make one concise statement and validate their point through facts. In doing this, they countered a lot of their own arguments and actually validated Ironmace's point several times. To add to this, Nexon proved that Korea was a valid venue and had jurisdiction by actively suing in Ironmace and Suwon, as I've already said. The judge says as much in the secondary documentation. So now, what's going on? Can the case be appealed? Can it be reopened? And this is where stuff kind of starts to look a little bit more like a little bit less hopeful. The dismissal was without prejudice, which means that Nexon can attempt to reopen the case through an appeal. This is almost guaranteed at this point, unless Nexon takes a settlement and just goes home. So sometime within the next 30 to 90 days, we should expect to see some sort of appeal go through from Nexon to try to get the case reopened. While I believe an appeal is unlikely to be granted, it is still a possibility. However, Nexon now has to find evidence as to why the U.S. is in fact the appropriate venue and jurisdiction to sue Ironmace, which would be extremely difficult, especially after the remarks in that I found in the secondary documentation. What this appeals process looks like is going to take its own video, right? I'm going to have to do a whole video about it, which I'm going to make in the next few days. But for now, all we need to know is that Nexon can and will most likely appeal this dismissal. If they succeed, they can then reopen the case. Until then, they can't restart the case, and therefore they cannot DMCA Ironmace in the United States, at least to the best of my knowledge. But again, I'm not a lawyer, and I do have to do some more fact-checking and research and ask some people some questions. So, at least for now, to the best of my knowledge, Nexon can't do shit about this until they are granted an appeal, right? So, then they could start doing something. But what happens next? So first, Nexon's going to try to appeal the decision almost immediately, unless they settle, which is very likely at this point. Nexon just took a huge L in the U.S., which is going to be hard to recover from. So even if they do somehow manage to win in the appeals process and get the case reopened, they will then have to argue the case with evidence that's already been proven to not hold any water. So their case just got hammered. It literally just got smashed. Everything that they gave to the courts to try to prove that their case was valid just got thrown out the window. So this is going to be an uphill battle for Nexon in the United States. And in my opinion, it's probably in their best interest to take whatever settlement that Ironmace is willing to give them and get the hell out of there and force Ironmace to sign an NDA so that they could go back to Korea and say that they're the good guys, right? That would probably be in Nexon's best interest. If they don't, they are risking a lengthy court battle that will almost assuredly turn against them in the U.S. It's going to alienate all of Nexon's any remaining Nexon's fans of Nexon in the United States and Europe. Nexon's only real hope is that Ironmace loses in the Korean court case, right? So Ironmace's last big hurdle is this Korean injunction situation, which is supposed to come down the pipe somewhere between the next 4 days to 34 days. So sometime, I think it was one of the last articles I read said it was going to be August 21st through September 21st. So the next literally 4 to 34 days. If Nexon loses in Korea and they don't get the injunction against Ironmace, it's basically game over. There would be absolutely nothing they could do to stop Ironmace from keeping Dark and Darker up and alive, unless the trial goes a distance and they somehow win in Korea. But by that time, Ironmace Dark and Darker will have already been released for 2 years, right? So it's going to be very hard to get the game shut down after 2 years, even if they win the trial. They'll probably get a shit ton of money if they do end up winning in Korea at the end of a trial. But if the injunction happens, it's basically game over, at least in my opinion. If the injunction happens against Nexon, it's game over. And the funny thing is, that's exactly what happened with NCSoft versus Bluehole, which was a much more damaging case against Bluehole, where they actually stole computers, they stole files, they got caught stealing, like actually got caught stealing, not just accused of. It was proven that they stole. And the game wasn't just similar, it was like an exact copy. Terra was like an exact copy of Lineage 3. So the races, everything was the exact same. It was like nutty. I've showed this in a previous video. So for now, we just kind of got to keep an eye on Steam to see if they allow Dark and Darker back on their platform. Technically speaking, there's a window of like 1 to 3 months where Nexon cannot legally DMCA Ironmace, at least to the best of my knowledge. This means that Steam can reopen their listing for Dark and Darker and cash in on this mega hit and get their 30%, right? Other than that, for now, we just kind of wait and enjoy the game until the Korean injunction. There's nothing that's going to stop. There's nothing immediately that's going to take Dark and Darker away from anybody. So we have at least 1 to 3 months of Dark and Darker before anything can change that. So for those of you who skipped to the end, we did it. We held the line. The game's live. The U.S. case is dismissed, at least for now. Let's go. Let's freaking go. We did it. We did it. I'm pumped. You should be pumped. Let's freaking go. This is amazing news. This is crazy. Sorry I bumped my mic. Nexon can still... The bad news with this good news is that Nexon can still appeal the decision to dismiss, and there's still the Korean case going on. There's also a 50-50 chance that Dark and Darker goes back up on Steam in the next 1 to 3 months. But for now, go to darkanddarker.com and buy the game there. Ironmace makes more money that way. If anything happens, they have their launcher and they're updating consistently. If you're worried about your game being on the Steam launcher, I'm going to show you guys how to load it, how to load the Ironmace launcher into Steam so that you can launch it through Steam. If you would like to do that, and I'm going to make a video about that. As always, have fun, have an awesome day. Leave a comment below, like, subscribe, do all this stuff. Please, if you want to come have some fun with us, jump in the Discord. There's usually about 2 to 3 teams in there, just kind of having fun, hanging out. Lots of good people. But yeah, jump in the Discord, come hang out, have some fun. I love you guys. Thank you so much for all your support. I can't do this without you. Peace.